They say 50 is the new 30. Honestly, I've never quite bought into that, especially when my knees sing a little protest tune every time I tackle the office stairs. But despite the occasional creak, I'd never felt more grounded, more certain of my place. I'd earned every silver strand in my hair, every line that mapped the corners of my eyes. And under the right lighting, usually the unforgiving fluorescence of the main conference room, I like to think I looked formidable. My name is Liz, and I'm 52. For 15 years, I've been a part of Vidian Strategies, one of those boutique consultancy firms where the client roster boasts Fortune 500 names, and the coffee machine seems to have a personal vendetta against good taste, perpetually serving up something burnt. Our office? It's perched on the 19th floor of a gleaming, mirrored tower in Midtown. My desk offers a panoramic sweep of the skyline, with a tantalizing smudge of green from Central Park far below. But more than the view, more than the overpriced espresso, it's the respect I've cultivated here that I treasure. I head the analytical systems department, and despite what some might assume when they see the silver in my hair, I'm not someone who coasts. I'm the one they call when systems crash, when timelines implode, when the data spins a narrative no one wants to hear. I'm not loud. I don't schmooze at after-work drinks like the eager 20-somethings, nor do I pepper my speech with the latest buzzwords to sound cutting edge. But when I speak, people listen. They know I won't waste their time with fluff. Ask Liz had become something of an unofficial mantra around Vidian. Need to decipher the metrics behind a failing marketing campaign? Ask Liz, wrestling with a stubborn software integration? Ask Liz. Even the fresh-faced new hires, intimidated by the blinking red lights of a system error, quickly learned the drill. Don't panic. Just find Liz. So, when the executive team announced a full-scale strategy meeting for the following week, a vision alignment session, as the jargon-laden memo called it, I was more curious than concerned. These powwows happened a couple of times a year, usually a predictable ballet of PowerPoint presentations, corporate speak, and a lot of synchronized head nodding. But this one felt different. There was an undercurrent, a subtle buzz that prickled the air, followed by a peculiar hush. And then there was Ethan. Ethan was the CEO's son, fresh out of business school, brimming with that unshakable certainty that only youth and a prestigious degree can bestow. He'd been hired 3 months prior into a newly minted role, Chief Innovation Architect. What that actually entailed, no one was entirely sure. He favored flashy suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and talked about disruption and synergy ecosystems with the zeal of a street preacher. He moved through the office like he owned the very air everyone breathed, a frothy cappuccino permanently attached to one hand, his phone to the other. People humored him. I, for the most part, tolerated him. A week before the big strategy meeting, I was summoned to a pre-session alignment huddle with a few other department leads. Ethan naturally chaired it. He kicked things off with a 10-minute monologue about market pivots and leveraging paradigms. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, a Vidian specialty, and took meticulous notes, pretending not to notice the way his gaze seemed to skate right over me whenever he nominally solicited input. I wasn't rattled. I'd encountered 100 Ethans in my career. The ones who sized you up and wrote you off the moment they saw a wrinkle or a job title that didn't scream, next big thing. The ones who mistook experience for obsolescence. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that true wisdom isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, and sharp, like a surgeon's scalpel. Back in the sanctuary of my office, I pulled up the performance data from the last 5 years. If we were going to talk strategy, I wanted the unvarnished truth on my side. I immersed myself in the figures, the patterns, the efficiency reports, everything. Numbers, unlike people, never lie. They are the one language I speak with absolute fluency. Still, a nagging feeling of unease clung to me. Maybe it was the way Ethan had flashed a smile during that huddle, a little too polished, a little too rehearsed. Or perhaps it was his casual use of phrases like generational refresh and operational sunsetting, as if he were practicing for a TED Talk rather than discussing the livelihoods of real people. That night, I stayed late, finalizing my presentation. My segment in the strategy meeting was straightforward: an overview of our current data infrastructure and a roadmap for future optimization. No fireworks, no grandstanding, just facts. But I printed an extra copy of my talking points, a small, almost subconscious precaution. As the office lights dimmed one by one, and the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuums began to echo through the empty halls, I stood by my window, notes in hand, the city glowing like a carpet of scattered jewels below. 15 years. In none. A few days I'd walk into that boardroom ready to contribute just as I always had. I had no inkling, not the slightest premonition, of how profoundly everything was about to change. By Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office had shifted. It was subtle, but palpable. People were unusually quiet, a collective tension tightening the air, as if everyone was bracing for an impact they couldn't quite see. Whispers darted between cubicles like nervous sparrows, but no one voiced their anxieties openly. That is, until the internal memo landed in our inboxes at precisely 8:17 a.m. Subject: change of plans, upcoming strategy meeting. Dear team, due to an urgent matter requiring my presence in Dallas this week, I will unfortunately be unable to attend Wednesday's strategy session. Ethan will lead the meeting in my place. I trust in his ability to guide the conversation and appreciate your support in ensuring a smooth process. Best, Ronald Kinsey, CEO. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly. Dallas? That was unexpected. Ronald, our CEO, rarely traveled unless it was absolutely critical. He was a hands-on leader, especially when it came to significant internal presentations like this one. And then there was Ethan, now in charge. I leaned back in my chair, a slow exhale escaping my lips. It wasn't that I thought Ethan couldn't handle a meeting. He was, after all, a grown man with an expensive education. But handling a meeting wasn't the same as understanding its nuances, its undercurrents, its true purpose. Ronald, for all his flaws, always had a knack for grounding these sessions in reality, for keeping the visionary rhetoric tethered to achievable goals. Without him there, I had a sinking feeling Ethan would treat the boardroom like a stage, relishing the spotlight, armed with a blank script and an overabundance of confidence. Still, it wasn't my place to question the reshuffle. My role was simple: show up, deliver my segment, and sit down. Business as usual. Or so I thought. Later that morning, on my way to the break room for another cup of bravely endured coffee, I passed Ronald's office. The door was slightly ajar. I caught a glimpse of him, already in his navy overcoat, a suitcase standing sentinel by his desk. He looked tired, lines of worry etched around his eyes. Evelyn, his wife, and our head of HR stood beside him. Evelyn was more than just HR. She was the soul of Vidian, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and knew the names of their children by heart. "I don't feel right about leaving, Ron," she was saying, her voice low and troubled. "You know how he gets when he has an audience? He doesn't filter." Ronald sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "It's just a strategy update, Ev. Nothing too complex. He'll be fine. You'll be there, won't you?" "I'll be there," Evelyn confirmed, her voice firm, though the frown didn't leave her face. "But that doesn't mean he'll listen to me." I quickened my pace, pretending I hadn't overheard their exchange. But their words, heavy with unspoken concerns, followed me all the way back to my desk, settling like a stone in my stomach. By Wednesday, the morning of the meeting, the tension in the office had crystallized into something almost brittle. Everyone seemed to be dressed a little sharper, their voices a little softer. I saw a few colleagues muttering to themselves, rehearsing their updates under their breath. I chose my own quiet armor, a simple slate gray blazer and a pair of classic pearl earrings. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, we filed into the main conference room. The long, polished oak table gleamed under the recessed lighting. A carafe of coffee, undoubtedly mediocre, steamed gently at the back of the room. Chairs scraped against the floor as people took their seats. I settled into my usual spot. 3 places from the end, next to Raj from operations and Cynthia from client relations. Evelyn was already there, seated to the left of the head chair, her expression calm but unreadable. She greeted everyone with her customary warmth, even if her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Then Ethan walked in. He was dressed as if he were about to headline a Silicon Valley tech summit. A midnight blue suit, no tie, crisp white shirt with the top 2 buttons artfully undone. It was a little too casual, a little too peacocky for a company-wide strategy session at Vidian, but no one breathed a word of critique. "Good morning, everyone," he called out, clapping his hands together once with an air of forced bonhomie. "Let's get started." And just like that, the meeting began. 2. His credit, the first half wasn't the unmitigated disaster I'd secretly feared. Ethan introduced the agenda with surprising polish. He even managed to crack a few jokes that, against all odds, actually landed, momentarily lightening the oppressive atmosphere in the room. Raj delivered a concise and coherent report on logistics restructuring. Cynthia followed, outlining new client onboarding metrics with her usual precision. I watched Ethan nod sagely, murmuring encouraging phrases like, "Great insight, Cynthia," and "Excellent point, Raj. We'll definitely flag that for Q3. It wasn't perfect. He still had the air of someone playing a role, but it wasn't a train wreck either. Still, something about his restless energy, the way his eyes darted around the room seeking affirmation, made me sit a little straighter. It felt like he was leading us somewhere without a map, grinning all the way, oblivious to the cliffs ahead. I waited for my turn, my fingers resting lightly on my printed notes, my gaze occasionally flicking towards Evelyn. She, in turn, would sometimes shoot glances at her son, glances that were complex, a mixture of maternal concern and professional appraisal that I couldn't quite decipher. I didn't know it yet, couldn't have possibly guessed, but we were rapidly approaching a moment that would detonate everything. I'd been so focused on my notes, on the familiar cadence of data and projections, that I barely registered the subtle shift in the room's energy. Not at first. The meeting was progressing, Ethan moving through the agenda at an accelerated pace now, more animated, clearly riding the high of his own perceived momentum. I could see the way he glanced around after every pronouncement, seeking approval, like a performer feeding on applause. And then, it was my turn. I stood up calmly, my printed notes a familiar weight in my hand. I'd done this 100 times before. My slides were clear, the data tight, the conclusions actionable. I began speaking, my voice even and deliberate, walking them through a few key graphs on infrastructure load balancing, projected cost savings, and scalability metrics. The room was silent, attentive, except for Ethan. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, jaw tight. His eyes never truly met mine. They skittered around, occasionally flicking to his phone. He was listening, I supposed, but not to understand, merely waiting for his opportunity to speak again. I was on my final slide, summarizing the key takeaways for our optimization roadmap, when it happened. Ethan interrupted me, loudly. Okay, he said, waving a dismissive hand, a smirk playing on his lips. We've heard enough about spreadsheets and, legacy logic. A ripple of confusion, then discomfort, spread around the table. My mouth went dry, but I kept standing, meeting his gaze. I wouldn't be so easily dismissed. He didn't stop. He turned, almost theatrically, to the room, his voice dripping with a condescension that was breathtaking in its audacity. Look, Liz, we appreciate the history lesson, he began, the smile widening into something predatory. But Vidian is trying to build a rocket ship here, not a museum of outdated processes. Frankly, your perspective, while perhaps valuable in its day, feels like an anchor holding us back. The silence in the room was instant, violent. No one moved. Not a breath seemed to be taken. I could feel Evelyn stiffen beside him. I heard Cynthia inhale sharply next to me. Ethan pressed on, clearly emboldened by the lack of immediate challenge. We need to be agile, dynamic. This is a generational shift, Liz. A refresh. And with that, he paused for dramatic effect, his eyes, cold and dismissive, finally locking onto mine. Your role here has become, well, redundant. You're fired. The words, "you're fired," hung in the air like a shattered chandelier, all sharp edges and shocking finality. Painful. Useless. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I certainly didn't cry. With a calmness that surprised even myself, I closed my laptop. I gathered my printed notes, the ones I'd stayed up late to perfect. Then I turned and walked out of the conference room, my head held high, in complete silence. No one stopped me. No one said a word. Not yet. As I stepped into the hallway, the heavy conference room door clicking softly shut behind me, a strange sense of lightness, of detachment, washed over me. It was as if the ground had been yanked out from under me, but somehow I was still, upright, still breathing. The click of my heels against the polished tile echoed in the sudden cavernous silence of the 19th floor corridor as I walked back to my office. There would be fallout. I knew that with absolute certainty. But in that surreal, suspended moment, I didn't think about revenge or anger or even the injustice of it all. My only thought, crystal clear and chillingly calm, was, he has no idea what he just did. It had been 3 days since the strategy meeting. 3 days since my world at Vidian Strategies had unceremoniously imploded. I hadn't checked my work. Email, a feat in itself. I hadn't answered the handful of texts that trickled in, concerned messages from Raj, supportive ones from Cynthia, even an awkward, "I'm so sorry, that was insane," from the intern in marketing. Instead, I had spent the weekend walking. Miles and miles through the quiet, tree-lined streets near my apartment. I sipped coffee that didn't taste like obligation and tried to process the sheer, unadulterated audacity of what had happened. Part of me, the logical, data-driven part, still struggled to compute it. No exit interview, no HR protocol, just a brutal public humiliation and a cold, callous dismissal by a young man who wore his arrogance like a bespoke suit. But Monday always comes, and it came, with a vengeance, for Vidian Strategies. Ronald Kinsey, my actual boss, the founder and CEO, returned from his urgent trip to Dallas that morning. He wasn't in the building for more than 10 minutes before Evelyn, her face a mask of controlled fury, pulled him into his office and firmly closed the door. No one knew exactly what was said in that hushed, tense meeting, but the blinds were drawn, and the low, urgent murmurs that occasionally slipped through the frosted glass painted a picture of a conversation that was anything but pleasant. Half an hour later, Ronald summoned Ethan. Witnesses, or rather, ear witnesses, later recounted that the CEO's voice, usually calm and measured, echoed down the hallway with uncharacteristic force even before the door shut behind his son. "You what?" The incredulity in Ronald's voice was apparently palpable. Ethan, according to someone who accidentally passed by at that very moment, tried to explain, his voice reportedly a mix of bluster and unease. "It wasn't working, Dad. She's old school. We need a fresh image, a new direction. Data is important, sure, but she's not old school, Ethan," Ronald interrupted, his voice sharp with a disbelief that bordered on rage. "She's foundational. She's the bedrock of this company. She's the reason we have systems that actually work. Do you have any comprehension? Any inkling at all of what she's built here? Ethan faltered. A long, uncomfortable silence reportedly followed. I thought, no, you didn't think, Ronald shot back. You postured. You performed. Liz has been with this company for 15 years, Ethan. 15 years. She single-handedly pulled us through the 2011 client loss when we were on the brink of shutting our doors. She rebuilt our entire data infrastructure from the ground up after the market crash in 2015. Do you even remember the Baxter account? They were ready to walk, to take their millions elsewhere, until Liz, on her own time, rewrote their entire analytics pipeline practically overnight. That contract, Ethan, brings in $2.4 million annually. They renew every single year without fail, because of her. I didn't know. Ethan finally managed to stammer out, the bravado apparently seeping out of him. No, Ronald finished for him, his voice now low, heavy with a dawning understanding of the magnitude of the blunder. You didn't. More silence. Then Ronald's voice, quiet but decisive, cut through the stillness. You are going to fix this, Ethan. You are going to find her. You are going to apologize, sincerely, if you're capable of it. And you are going to offer her, position back, with a substantial bonus for this utter, complete humiliation. If she says no, I'll understand. But you, Ethan, are going to make that offer, and you're going to do it publicly, because this company does not erase the people who built it just to stroke someone's fragile ego. Apparently, Ethan said nothing, just nodded, his face pale. And across the city, as I stood in line at my favorite neighborhood cafe, staring blankly at a tray of blueberry muffins behind the glass, my phone buzzed. A new message. From Ronald Kinsey, subject. Liz, we need to talk. Liz, please let me know when you're available. I am so sorry for what happened. I didn't reply. Not yet. I ordered my coffee, took it to the small park across the street, and sat in the surprisingly warm spring sunlight. Let them stew in it. Let them wonder. Just a little longer. The calls started early the next morning. The first one lit up my phone just after 9 a.m. Ethan's name glared at me from the screen. I didn't move to answer. I simply watched it ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally faded to voicemail. Then I turned the phone face down on the kitchen counter. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. And again. By noon, I had accumulated 6 missed calls and 3 voicemails from Ethan, none of which I had any intention of listening to. I didn't need to hear his carefully rehearsed excuses or some manufactured CEO-mandated remorse. I didn't particularly care if he was genuinely sorry, or if Ronald had dispatched him on some humiliating, forced apology tour. What mattered, what had irrevocably shifted the landscape, was what had already happened. And those words, that public degradation, couldn't be unsaid. He had humiliated me. Publicly, loudly, without a flicker of hesitation. He hadn't pulled me aside for a private conversation. He hadn't voiced his supposed concerns about my outdated methods in any of the numerous meetings we'd attended. He hadn't even bothered to ask a single intelligent question about my work, my value, my 15-year legacy in that place. He'd simply looked around the room, decided I didn't fit his glossy, superficial aesthetic, and discarded me like an obsolete piece of office furniture. That kind of wound doesn't heal with a few contrite voicemails. I tried to distract myself with errands. The grocery store, the dry cleaners. I even stopped by the park again and attempted to lose myself in a book I couldn't actually read, my mind replaying that boardroom scene on a loop. But no matter what I did, the phone kept lighting up every few hours, a persistent, unwelcome beacon. I didn't respond. I wouldn't. By the time dusk began to bleed into the evening sky, I was tired, not from the walking or the errands, but from the sheer effort of holding back everything I wanted to scream into a voicemail that would be far too polite, too articulate for him to truly understand. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was already casting a warm, welcoming glow. And then I saw him, Ethan, standing on the sidewalk just outside my gate, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, looking like he'd been waiting for a while. I got out of the car slowly, my keys still in my hand. He opened his mouth to speak, a prepared speech no doubt already forming on his lips. "No," I said, my voice sharp and clear, cutting him off before he could utter a single syllable. "Don't." He took a hesitant half-step forward. I held up my hand, a clear, unequivocal stop sign. "I don't want to talk to you, Ethan." His mouth closed. The words he'd so carefully prepared, the apology he'd been sent to deliver, died before they reached the air. I didn't wait for a reply. I brushed past him, the scent of his expensive cologne an unwelcome intrusion, and walked towards my front door. I was halfway up the front steps when I heard it. His voice, no longer attempting contrition, but cracking with an undercurrent of frustration and something else, defiance. "You know what?" Ethan shouted, his voice just strained enough to betray the pressure beneath the carefully constructed facade. "I don't regret a single word I said." I stopped. Slowly, deliberately, I turned around. He had taken a step closer to my gate now, no longer pacing or pretending to be composed. His jaw was clenched, his eyes sharp and defensive, his hands balled into tight fists, as if he were fighting off something. Shame, perhaps, or just the stark reality that the groveling apology he'd come here to deliver had just spectacularly imploded into a petulant tantrum. "You heard me," he continued, his arms flinging out wide as if he needed an audience for this new performance. "You don't belong there anymore, Liz. You're stuck in the past. Everything about you, the way you run meetings, the way you talk, about systems like they actually matter more than branding an image. It's tired. It's outdated. The company's evolving, and we don't need dead weight dragging us down." There it was, the raw, unvarnished truth, finally clawing its way past all those carefully worded memos and synthetic corporate smiles. The real reason behind the way he'd always looked through me in meetings, the way he'd dismissed my insights with those condescending half-nods and patronizing smirks. This wasn't about progress. It never was. It was about power, about control. And my quiet competence, my deep-rooted experience, threatened his fragile illusion of it. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped, his voice rising, a flush creeping up his neck. "You think your years there earn you a free pass forever? You think because you've been through a few rough patches with the company, you're untouchable? You don't own that place, Liz. You're just another cog, one that's clearly rusting." I stared at him, letting the silence draw out, long and tight, between us. I wanted him to see it, to feel the weight of his own foolish words pressing down on that fragile, inflated ego of his. Then, I walked slowly back down the steps, stopping at the edge of the walkway, just close enough that he couldn't possibly pretend not to hear every single word. "You're right about one thing, Ethan," I said, my voice calm, measured, each word deliberately chosen. "I don't own Vidian strategies." He shifted slightly, a flicker of smugness threatening a comeback, thinking he'd scored a point. "But I built half of it," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Every major account you now lean on for those flashy presentations of yours, I helped land them. Every critical data system you pretend to understand, I designed it, coded it, and maintained it. You walked into a legacy, Ethan, a foundation that people like me created with years of grit, sacrifice, and actual innovation. And you treat it like a shiny toy your father conveniently left you in his will." His face twitched, a muscle jumping in his jaw. But I didn't stop. I wasn't finished. "You call me outdated because you're too inexperienced, too blinded by your own hype to recognize wisdom when it speaks. You think being loud means being right. You think firing me, humiliating me, made you powerful. I took another step closer, my gaze never leaving his. But you didn't just fire me, Ethan. You exposed yourself. You showed every executive, every department lead, every single client who will inevitably notice I'm gone, exactly who you are, he scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of his earlier bravado. And who are you, Liz, huh? Just some aging analyst clinging desperately to relevance. I nodded slowly, a faint, almost pitying smile touching my lips. No, Ethan. I'm the one you're going to see in every gap you can't fill, in every complex process you don't understand, in every looming crisis you don't know how to navigate. I'm the one they're all going to remember when the systems start to break, when the numbers inexplicably fall, when the silence in the room gets deafeningly loud because the person who actually knew what she was doing isn't there to fix it anymore. He looked away then, his jaw tight, his breathing shallow. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable realization. And I leaned in, one last time, my voice dropping to a quiet, confidential tone. You're still just a daddy's boy, Ethan, I said, softly but with pinpoint accuracy. Wrapped in a title you didn't earn, walking through doors someone else always opened for you. But here's the thing about that, the thing you haven't learned yet. Your parents won't always be there to clean up your messes, to save you from yourself. And when that day comes, when it's just you, standing alone with nothing to fall back on, but your own questionable merit, it's going to break you. And you won't even see it coming. I turned back towards the house, climbed the steps slowly, and opened my front door. This time, I didn't look back. I didn't slam it either. Some endings don't need dramatic punctuation. They just need the quiet, undeniable weight of truth. Back at Vidian Strategies, the air in the usually bustling office felt heavier than usual, charged with an unspoken anxiety. People moved through the halls with a quiet, almost furtive urgency, pretending not to notice the gaping hole that had been left. But they noticed. Oh, they noticed. My absence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lingered in the rapidly accumulating, unanswered emails, in the subtle but growing number of systems that weren't running quite as smoothly as they always had. It was felt in the way Ethan's eyes seemed to instinctively avoid the analytics wing every time he passed it. Whispers had started, tentative at first, then growing in volume and frequency. Even Evelyn, usually the epitome of calm composure, had reportedly overheard one of the junior analysts murmur, "Have you heard anything about Liz? Is she really gone?" to a colleague in the break room. They both fell abruptly silent when she walked in. Up on the top floor, behind a heavy glass door that bore his name in discreet silver lettering, Ronald Kinsey sat at his expansive desk, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. It was a view he loved, all clean lines, open sky, everything orderly and contained. But nothing inside that opulent room felt orderly now. His morning coffee had long gone cold. The inbox on his oversized monitor was overflowing with flagged messages, yet he hadn't touched a single one since 9 a.m. His mind was elsewhere, replaying conversations, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things had begun to fracture, to unravel so spectacularly. Ethan entered without knocking, a breach of protocol that normally would have earned him a sharp rebuke. Ronald didn't look up right away. "She said no," Ethan announced, his voice flat, devoid of its usual confidence. He seemed to want to get the words out quickly before he lost his nerve. Ronald blinked, then slowly turned his chair, his eyes narrowing. "What?" I went to her house. "I apologized," Ethan mumbled, looking down at his expensive shoes. "I did what you told me to do." He looked exhausted, a strange, unsettling mix of residual guilt and bewildered confusion etched across his usually smug face. "But she's not coming back." Ronald sat forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. You apologized? You told her you were wrong? You told her the company needs her, that I— He hesitated, the words apparently catching in his throat, forcing him to swallow his own considerable pride. That I made a mistake? Yes, Ethan confirmed. And still, she said no. Ronald's voice, when he finally spoke, had lost its usual boardroom calm. It was edged now, cracked with a disbelief that was rapidly morphing into something akin to despair. She said, Ethan faltered, then continued quoting me. She said I don't understand what it means to earn something, that I didn't just fire her, I disrespected everything she built. She said she won't be part of a place where she isn't valued. Evelyn appeared silently in the doorway, her arms crossed, her presence a quiet but unmistakable counterpoint to the tension in the room. She's right, Ronald, she said simply, her voice firm. Ethan looked down again, his fingers curling into tight fists at his sides. I didn't mean to lose her, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. But you did, Ronald said, his voice low and bitter. He leaned back heavily in his chair, his eyes scanning the cityscape as if it might offer him the answers that eluded him. She was the one person in this entire company I could always count on, no matter what. She stayed through every crisis, every round of layoffs, every difficult merger negotiation. Hell, Liz practically held this place together. With duct tape and sheer willpower when our own tech team was imploding a few years back. Evelyn stepped further into the room, her tone softening slightly, though her gaze remained unyielding. She stayed because she believed in this company, Ron, not in the perks, not in the fancy title, but in the work, and in the people she worked with. She gave everything she had to Vidian. I thought she'd never leave, Ronald said, almost to himself, his voice laced with a profound weariness. I thought, after everything we've been through together, I thought we were like family to her. She didn't leave, Ron, Evelyn replied, her voice gentle but firm. She was shoved out the door, in front of everyone, by your son, with words. I wouldn't repeat to my worst enemy. Ronald rubbed his face, a gesture of utter exhaustion. Then he stood slowly, walking heavily to the window, his back to them. What do I do now, Ev? How do I possibly fix this? You can't just fix this with a bigger title or a fatter bonus, Ronald, she said, her voice tinged with a sadness that mirrored his own. This isn't about money anymore. It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about the fact that she gave you 15 years of unwavering loyalty, and you allowed someone, your own son, to humiliate her, to discard her, without you even being in the room to witness it, let alone prevent it. Ethan looked up, his expression wounded. I tried to make it right. I told you, I apologized. No, Ethan, Evelyn interrupted, her patience clearly wearing thin. You tried to patch up your own guilt. You tried to follow your father's instructions to save your own skin. That's not the same as truly making it right. The room went quiet again, the only sound the distant thrum of city traffic. Ronald stood still, his gaze fixed on the streets below, a miniature world of complex, interconnected systems. She always said the numbers tell the story, he murmured, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. But I ignored the story that was playing out right in front of my own eyes. He turned slowly back towards them, his face drawn, etched with a new, painful understanding. She's gone, he said again, the words heavy with finality. And I let her go. It had been 5 days since I walked out of Vidian Strategies. 5 days without the incessant ping of conference call reminders, without the late-night glow of dashboard analytics, without the back-to-back meetings fueled by stale bagels and lukewarm coffee. 5 days without the crushing pressure that used to define my identity like a second skin. I thought I'd feel unmoored, lost, adrift in a sea of unscheduled time. But strangely, I didn't. What I felt, with an almost startling clarity, was relief. Every morning since that awful, humiliating meeting, I woke up to a dozen emails I didn't have to answer. Clients, loyal ones I'd worked with for years, still emailed, their messages a mix of concern and confusion. Whispers had clearly reached them and they wanted to know where I'd gone, if I was okay. But I replied to none of them. Not yet. Not until I decided what this next chapter of my life, of my career, would look like. And this time, it would be entirely on my terms. That morning, as I sipped my coffee in the sunlit corner of my kitchen, my personal phone buzzed again. Another message. Another unknown number initially, but the signature was clear. It was Ronald. From Ronald Kinsey. Subject: a thought, Liz. Liz, I know things have been tense, to say the least. I heard Ethan came to speak with you yesterday. I understand from what he said that it didn't go the way we had hoped, but I'm writing to ask, maybe even to plead, that you reconsider. You loved this job, Liz. You gave so much of yourself, so much of your talent and dedication to this company. Isn't that worth holding on to? I know what Ethan said was completely out of line, inexcusable. But he's young. He's still learning. He apologized. Maybe this is one of those moments where you could offer a little grace? We all say things we regret. He'll grow from this, I promise you. Please don't throw away 15 years of incredible work over a single, albeit terrible, mistake. That's not wise. We need you, Liz. I need you. Ronald. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button, unmoving. It wasn't just the message itself, with its carefully chosen words of placation. It was the subtext, the subtle, insidious twisting of reality, as if what had happened to me was a small, insignificant slight. As if being publicly degraded, insulted, and summarily fired by the CEO's son wasn't worthy of profound consequence. Not wise. That particular phrase lodged in my throat like a sharp, painful splinter. And that's when I knew, with absolute certainty. It wasn't just Ethan. Ronald hadn't come to my defense because he truly valued me. Liz Whitmore, the person, the architect of his company's core systems. He'd intervened because he was trying to preserve the machine. The finely tuned system I had helped keep running smoothly, the lucrative clients I had retained, the robust infrastructure I had painstakingly built from the ground up. To him, this wasn't about justice, or dignity, or respect. It was about utility. He didn't want to make things right for me. He wanted to rewind time, to go back to when I was silently, efficiently solving problems so others could take the credit and the glory. Forgiveness wasn't what he was truly asking for. He was asking me to shrink again, to make myself small and accommodating. And I'd done more than enough of that for one lifetime. I didn't respond to Ronald's email. Not at first. Instead, I opened a folder I had quietly labeled porch camera footage on my laptop. The night Ethan had shown up at my house, uninvited and unwelcome, had been recorded. It was a habit born from years of living alone. I had a few discreet security cameras installed around my property. Nothing fancy, just a small doorbell cam and a side lens tucked beneath the eaves of the roof. I hadn't thought twice about them until I found myself standing on my own front step, facing down a young man who was desperately trying to rewrite history, to gaslight me into accepting his version of events. Ethan had come to apologize, yes, but only after being explicitly told to do so by his father. What had followed, once his initial, insincere script had failed, was no apology at all. And now, I had the proof. Crisp audio. Clear visuals. His voice, laced with that familiar arrogance, rang out sharp and clear through my laptop speakers as I replayed the crucial moment. You just don't get it, do you? Your time is over. This is a young person's game now. We need fresh blood, new ideas, not relics. You're holding the company back. Every bitter, dismissive syllable. He had tried to walk it back later, of course, in his panicked voicemails, tried to reframe the narrative. But the truth doesn't need revision. It just needs a platform. So, I gave it one. I composed a short, succinct email. No fluff, no anger, just the unadulterated facts. Subject, a thought, Liz. Context. Ronald, since you asked me to reconsider, and invoked the concept of wisdom, I thought you should see and hear exactly what you're asking me to forgive, and what growing from this actually looked like in the moment. Please find attached the video clip from the night your son came to my home. The camera caught everything, no edits, no dramatization, just the unvarnished truth of his apology and subsequent remarks. Perhaps this will provide the context you seem to be missing. Liz. I attached the clip and hit send. Then, I shut my laptop and went for a long, invigorating walk in the crisp spring air. By the time I got back, my phone had exploded with notifications. But they weren't from Ronald, not initially. They were from my old colleagues, a flurry of frantic, almost panicked messages. Chaos, it seemed, had well and truly broken out at Vidian Strategies in my absence. The intricate systems I had designed, the custom-coded integrations, the deeply nuanced analytical frameworks, they had begun to crack under the strain of neglect and misunderstanding. Daily operations that used to hum with quiet efficiency now sputtered and stalled. Key reports were overdue. Urgent client inquiries went unanswered or were answered incorrectly. The error logs, which I used to monitor and address proactively, were piling up, unheeded. 3 major client-facing dashboards, critical for their own operations, failed to load by noon, triggering a cascade of frantic messages from long-time, high-value accounts, all asking the same question: where is Ms. Whitmore? The team was scrambling, calling in expensive emergency consultants, desperately trying to reverse engineer processes they had never fully understood because, as one message bluntly put it, Liz always just handled it. And this time Liz wasn't there. Internal Slack threads, I heard later, lit up with a mixture of frustration, fear, and a dawning, uncomfortable respect for what they had lost. Someone, inevitably, leaked part of the minutes from that disastrous Wednesday meeting, specifically, the part where Ethan announced my firing. That only added fuel to the already raging fire. She carried the damn weight of this place and we just let her walk. I told you all this would happen. No one listened. They fired our anchor. In the middle of a storm. Inside the executive suite, Ronald Kinsey finally watched the video. The blood, Evelyn later told me, drained from his face. Ethan's voice, unfiltered, cruel, undeniably his, echoed off the polished walls of his luxurious office. Evelyn stood. Beside him, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line of restrained fury and vindication. Ronald didn't speak for a long, agonizing time. Then, he looked up from the screen, his eyes filled with a horrified understanding, and said the only thing left to say, I didn't know. I truly didn't know it was that bad. But it was too late. He knew now. The storm inside Vidian was no longer brewing. It had broken. The video, or at least detailed descriptions of its contents, had circulated through the upper floors of Vidian Strategies with astonishing speed. Whispers turned into open, incredulous confrontation. Even the more passive, politically cautious executives, the ones who usually stayed well out of interpersonal dramas, found themselves speechless, watching Ethan's unhinged tirade play out on a 22-inch conference room monitor during an impromptu, hushed gathering. There was no spinning it. There was no defending it. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what it revealed about leadership, about character, about the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester under the shadow of unchecked entitlement. Ronald called Ethan into his office the next morning. The meeting, I was told, lasted exactly 11 minutes. Ethan emerged, white-faced and hollow-eyed, carrying a small cardboard box. No flashy blazer, no smug expression, just silence. He didn't look back as he stepped into the elevator, his chief innovation architect. Title already a forgotten footnote. Ronald didn't call a press conference. He didn't write a carefully worded, PR-spun company-wide email. He didn't even try to hide behind HR. He got in his car and drove to my house. When I opened the door, I saw something in him I hadn't seen in a very long time, perhaps ever. Humility. The same man who had once shaken my hand 15 years ago, full of confidence and vision, welcoming me into his fledgling company as their secret weapon, now stood on my doorstep with tired eyes, slumped shoulders, and no defenses left. "Liz," he said quietly, his voice raspy, "you were right. About everything." He didn't try to soften it. He didn't try to justify Ethan's words or his own prolonged silence and willful ignorance. He just let the undeniable weight of his failure, his misjudgment, hang in the air between us. "I told Ethan it's over," he continued, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "No more hand-holding, no more legacy rides, no more safety net. He's on his own now. Let him see how far. Arrogance and a fancy degree take him without a parachute." I said nothing, just watched him waiting. "And you," he exhaled, a long, weary sigh. "You deserved better, Liz. So much better. Not just from him. From me." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple, unadorned manila folder. "It's your offer," he said, holding it out. "Your role, on your terms, no conditions, no politics. Evelyn's already signed off. The board has too. It's unanimous." "I'm not sure I want to come back, Ronald," I said, my voice calm, not cruel, just honest. The thought of returning to that environment, even with Ethan gone, was daunting. "I wouldn't blame you for a second if you didn't," he admitted, his eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a sincerity I hadn't expected. "But this place? It isn't right without you, Liz. The people know it. The clients certainly know it." "Hell," he gave a humorless laugh. "Even I know it now, loud and clear." He looked me squarely in the eye. "I'm not asking you to forgive us, Liz. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm asking you to come back and help me rebuild it, the right way this time. As my equal. As the strategic leader this company should have recognized and empowered all along." The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken history and the potential of an unknown future. Then I reached out, took the folder, and opened it. The title printed on the offer letter wasn't Head of Analytical Systems. It read, Chief Operations Officer, Liz Whitmore. Not a token, not a gesture. A truth, finally, unequivocally acknowledged. I looked up at Ronald, a man who had been forced, kicking and screaming to finally see clearly. "If I come back, Ronald," I said, my voice steady and resolute, "things will be different, radically different. I'm not playing small anymore, and I'm certainly not protecting people at any level from the consequences of their own incompetence or arrogance." He managed a faint, tired smile. A smile of a man who had stared into the abyss and perhaps learned something profound. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Liz," he said. "Frankly, I'd be disappointed if you did." That following Monday, I walked back into Vidian Strategies. Not through the side door, not quietly, not with my head bowed in false modesty. I walked straight through the main entrance, my head held high. As I passed through the open plan office, people stood up. Not in a staged, obligatory way, but spontaneously. They applauded. Not for show, but for genuine recognition, for respect earned, lost, and now, hopefully, rightfully restored. I took my new seat, not at the periphery, but at the head of the main conference table. I opened my laptop. And I began again. Not from the beginning, but most definitely from the top.